Hey guys, welcome back to Clownfish TV. This is Neon. We're going to talk about the comic book industry. We're going to talk about Marvel Comics and former legendary Marvel Comics editor Jim Shooter ripping current year Marvel Comics to shreds. I thought this was going to make for a pretty interesting video. I saw it out on Twitter. Heroes Punching 2099 put this up, a critique that Jim Shooter has of a recent-ish Captain America issue, Captain America and Bucky, and the cover. And yeah, Marvel covers lately have been pretty lackluster for the most part. A lot of them have been very jokey or phoned in or controversial just for the sake of being controversial. Nothing like the covers back in the 80s and even the 90s. On Jim Shooter's watch. Jim Shooter, of course, being a legend, legendarily picky and also difficult to work with, as I've understood it from some creators. But, you know, he expected the best from his people, and he definitely righted the ship at Marvel. Most of the classic comics storylines from the 80s, the ones that, you know, Disney is strip mining. So many classic storylines were produced on Jim Shooter's watch. He was the editor-in-chief of Marvel from, I think it was 78 to 87. So you can definitely see that classic era of Marvel Comics, late 70s through the late 80s, all of the stuff I grew up reading, you know, getting into comics when I was young in the 80s, started, you know, reading G.I. Joe, believe it or not, was my very first comic book series. And then I went from G.I. Joe to Transformers. And then I got into like X-Men and Spider-Man and all these other comics, and so many fantastic storylines on his watch, regardless of what you think about him as a person. Now, he's very picky. He's very, very picky. And we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about what Jim Shooter thinks about current year Marvel, courtesy of an interview from a couple years ago, because things honestly haven't changed that much. If anything, I think Marvel's gotten slightly worse, and I think it comes down to finances and also the mentality of the people working in the industry. I think a lot of them are just biding their time, hoping for a Hollywood deal, and they're not really focused on making good comics because it's just a step stool. It's just a stepping stone to something else in their mind. So it's not that important that they put out good monthly comics. Gonna talk about this. Before we get into it any further, please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, guys. We're over 205,000 subs. Thank you so much for the support. Greatly appreciate. We talk about comics, we talk about animation, pop culture, whatever's going on in Hollywood, you know, a lot of crazy things going on in Hollywood we're going to be covering this week. So here we go. This is coming from Heroes Punching 2099. Jim Shooter critiquing this random issue of Captain America and Bucky has more sauce on it than whatever your barbecue will have today. This would have been the 4th of July yesterday. So yeah, I don't know when this came out, probably what, 10 years ago? Maybe it was 10, I don't know. 299. Yes, this is actually January 2012. So this was going down, you know, almost 10 years ago. So I mean, Marvel, the decline hasn't really been slow. I think it's you know, definitely escalated in the last 4 or 5 years, but I would say the major decline in Marvel Comics happened around the time that Disney bought Marvel Comics. You know, I mean, for sure, it really, they stopped being a comic book publisher first, and now they're just an IP factory, and a lot of the people working there really don't give a shit. You know, they're phoning it in. They're not getting paid very much. They're not getting paid enough to care. Let's put it that way. But this is the cover. It probably came up because of Black Widow. And this is what he had to say. Jim Shooter. We comics savvy types know that the female character is dressed like Black Widow and has reddish hair. I'm not sure it's her, though. She doesn't look like Black Widow, facially or any other way. She doesn't have the figure, and her head is too big. Her girlish figure and proportionately large head caused me to suspect that maybe she's supposed to be a young girl. A very young Black Widow, maybe? But the drawing is pretty bad. Hard to tell whether the art is meant for the character to look young or it's just bad draftsmanship. Look at her face and head. Distorted, poorly constructed, and extra cartoony compared to the rest of the image. And this was 10 years ago. Can you imagine what he'd have to say about Marvel Comics 2021? What we have here is another pinup in a seemingly endless parade of pinup covers. The male character looks sort of dangerous and menacing, which supports my villain of the piece theory. I don't know what to make of her. Her pose is strange. What's she doing? And her expression? What it's meant to convey is unfathomable. His upper arm overlaps hers in a bad way. His bulging muscles, colored, shaded, and rendered similarly to her shoulder, create a minor visual conundrum. Bad composition. Not disastrous, just not good. I would never pick up this comic book because the cover is bland, uninformative, and not compelling. That would be a shame because some nice art and some good words can be found inside. Ouch. Jamal here says, one of the worst aspects of modern comics are the covers. There's no care in attracting kids or new readers. Everything is a glorified pinup, and there isn't much detail about the actual issue. That's true. It used to be back in the day that the cover was an advertisement for what was inside. And sometimes they kind of went all Inquirer on it. It was like, oh my God, who's the character in the shadow? Oh my God, did so-and-so die? And they'll tell you that right in the cover, like, does Spider-Man die? Probably not. Current year Marvel, even if he did, they'd just bring him back in some ridiculous way, and he wouldn't be quite the same, would he? Larry King says, I agree with Jim 100%. It's Ed McGuinness phoning it in here. That Black Widow isn't good, and what's up with her hand back there? Yeah, I don't know what she's doing. God, it doesn't even look like, you can't tell it's a hand. It's really weird. Anyway, yeah, not a terribly good cover. But again, for what Marvel's paying people these days and the deadlines that they have to work with, this is kind of the utter state. Now, Jim Shooter has been very outspoken about his dislike of current year Marvel Comics. Now, this is actually back in 2017, and I'm sorry, things haven't gotten any better. If anything, they've probably gotten a little bit worse. It's just, I mean, we're at the end of the line here. Marvel is no longer a comic book publisher. They're not really focused on creating comic books. They're just kind of existing. I mean, hell, even Eric Larson is coming out and saying that Marvel and DC are kind of existing. They're just crapping out as much stuff as they can crap out because, Disney and or Warner may decide that it's not worth it anymore to publish comic books and just outsource those comics. But this is coming from CBR a couple of years ago. Jim Shooter isn't happy with current Marvel Comics. I'm sure he still isn't. Former 80s Marvel Comics editor-in-chief Jim Shooter is critical of the current state of the publisher's catalog, criticizing the storytelling. It's gotten worse, Jim. Have you seen the Hellfire Gala? Yeah, it's gotten way worse. It's gotten worse. One of the most iconic editors to ever grace the comics industry, Jim Shooter has a lot of impressive credits to his name, starting out as a comic scribe in his teens. Yeah, that's the thing. These guys started out when they were teenagers. A lot of them in New York, and they'd go work at Marvel. Shooter worked up the ranks to one day head Marvel Comics throughout the 80s. Under his tenure, the House of Ideas published Walt Simonson's Thor, Frank Miller's Daredevil, and hired artists like Jim Lee, Todd McFarlane, Mark Silvestri, and Eric Larson, who would go on to form Image Comics, among many other accomplishments. The heyday of the X-Men was on Jim Shooter's watch. So many classic storylines, so many amazing, Secret Wars was on his watch. Dark Phoenix Saga was on his watch. Vision Quest, which I think it was on. Was it starting in 87 or 88? Maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was later. It's just, you cannot overstate the importance of Jim Shooter to what comics was in the 80s and even the 90s. His influence was still felt into the 90s. And of course, he went and started Valiant. And Valiant was actually very, very good. In the 90s Valiant. Not current Valiant, but 90s Valiant was very, very good. Now the writer-editor has opened up about the current state of his former company, Marvel Comics. Candidly, as he's known to be, Shooter criticized the publisher's current slate. I think they forgot what business they're in, Shooter told Adventures in Poor Taste, which is a podcast, I think. I think there's some brilliant talent out there. If you just flip through the books, the pictures are incredible. Sometimes they don't tell the story as well as they should. Sometimes they're actually designing pages to sell in places like this, a comic convention, not really thinking about the best way to tell a story. The writing, I cannot account for much of the writing. You have brilliant guys like Mark Wade who will do something and it's great, but so much of the stuff is what they call decompressed storytelling. Shooter even took some time to discuss his opinion and the success of Wonder Woman, telling the site that there's a strong example of keeping the core of a character while changing certain aspects of their mythos to great success. Are we talking about the movie? Oh yeah, he's talking about the movie. I'm sorry, Jim Shooter. I'm sorry. Wonder Woman 84 came out and kind of undid all the goodwill of the Wonder Woman movie. He said he just saw Wonder Woman. It was good. I liked it. Yeah, I liked it too. I thought it was great. And I heard people say, well, it's not the original Wonder Woman. Here's the deal. If you go out and ask 1,000 people, tell you everything they know about Superman, you'll hear the same things. Daily Planet, Lois Lane, Clark Kent, blah, blah. You'll never hear about Mr. Mxyzptlk or the Fortress of Solitude. Anything that 1,000 people say, keep that, don't mess with that. Anything that 1,000 people don't say, you get a little flexibility. Wonder Woman was created during the war, so she has the red, white, and blue with stars, No one cares about that. When you ask people about Wonder Woman, you're lucky if they come up with Amazons. That's true. That's true. That they also want Wonder Woman to be Wonder Woman, to be heroic, and not ugly as sin either. That's new. Did you see that YA graphic novel where Wonder Woman looks like a 52-year-old chain smoker from Florida? Yeah, that wasn't very good. But yeah, God, it really shows how far that Marvel has fallen. And this isn't the worst of it. I mean, this isn't even close. This was 2012. There was still some pretty good stuff out there. But you can see the decline in quality. You see it in hindsight even more so now. When you look at what the X-Men were under Jim Shooter's watch, and then you look at the Hellfire Gala, and what a joke the X-Men had become. And Rob Liefeld, who, regardless of what you think about his art, he still sold a shit ton of comic books, getting blasted because he's been critical of the X-Men, because he's been bragging about the sales numbers. But I mean, look, people are buying comics. They're buying lots and lots of comics. They're just not buying Marvel comics and DC comics like they used to, because frankly, it's not hooking the kids. Manga is definitely where it's at for a lot of people right now. And there's a ton of it out there that's really, really good. And for $10, you get 100 and some pages of story. And compared to, what is it, $4, $5 now for a floppy? That's insane. When I was a kid, they were 75 cents, $1. I mean, I could take my lawn mowing money, my allowance money, and I bought pretty much all the major Marvel titles every month. And it cost me about $20, $30. And I had a lot of comics. I bought a lot of comics. They were cheap, they were entertaining, they were good quality. And the people working on them, for the most part, didn't hate that they were just making comic books. They didn't have delusions of Hollywood, because this is before Hollywood started strip mining the comic book industry. We had our Batman and our Superman movies, but wasn't like every damn character was getting a movie. You knew there was never going to be, or you thought there was never going to be, a movie with Rocket freaking Raccoon in it. Yet here we are. Here we are. So I'm going to wrap this one up, guys. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, and we'll talk to you later.